Okay, welcome everyone to How to Be Confident at Managing Meetings. Hopefully by the end of this session you'll have some tips and some things that you can use to help you feel a bit more confident when you're meeting with professionals, whether that's at an education setting or a health appointment or one of the other millions of appointments that we tend to have to go to as parent carers. Okay, so at the moment, I'm just going to say if everyone could be on mute. To be fair, if you want to speak out, that's absolutely fine because there's only a few of us here today. If you want to ask any questions, put your hand up or just pop them in the chat and Rachel will let me know. And if you need to go away from the screen for any reason because something happens and life gets in the way, just carry on. That's absolutely fine. Don't worry. Okay, so normally in this session I would do an icebreaker, but I'm conscious that obviously on Teams that's quite difficult. But it's quite good if we can just start off by having a bit of an understanding about your child and your child's diagnosis, if that's okay and you're comfortable with that, guys. We'll edit this bit out of the recording just so that you know. Okay, so first of all, one of the things that's really important, I think, to just talk about when we're doing any of these sessions is that often people are going to forget what's been said. You might forget what people did, but actually you're going to remember how you were made to feel in meetings, and that will come with you and you'll take that through your journey. Okay. So, simple rules for today's session is just be kind to one another. Everybody's a parent carer. We're all going through very similar challenges. Try to give everybody an opportunity to speak and share their views. That's quite simple because we're in a smaller group today. No question is a silly question. I don't mind if you need to take phone calls. That's fine. Just carry on whatever you need to do. Okay, so we're going to first of all talk about the world of being a parent carer. So on this slide, we really talk about all the different things that we need to do. So obviously we have our standard role of being a parent, but on top of that, we also end up finding that to a certain extent, we end up being a teacher, psychologist, stylist. We talk about being commissioner because we might have to organise services for our children. We have to chair meetings. We end up being the nurse, the taxi. I don't think taxi's on there, but that tends to be one of ours. And you just have to learn lots and lots of extra things as you're going along. And I know we talked briefly just a minute ago about the fact that these sessions you can pick up information about different things that is available. I'm going to be honest, I've got my children are now coming into the sort of coming out into out the teens and into the adult world, and I'm still learning stuff all the time, and there's new things that come up and I go, oh, I'm not quite sure, I need to go and have a little look. So it is a continual journey, and it's just a real juggle sometimes to manage all of those things. So on top of all of that, we also have to attend lots of meetings and lots of appointments with our children. So what does it feel like to be a parent carer? It can be stressful. It can cause us to have anxiety. It can be really confusing at times, especially when you go into a meeting or someone's talking to you that's been doing this for quite a long time and they start using lots of acronyms. That can be really confusing, knowing who to go to for what and when. It can be depressing sometimes. We often find parents talk about that after they've had to fill in something like a disability living allowance form or an application, because you have to go through all of your child's needs. It can feel quite depressing at the end of that process. Can be worrying, worry about what the future is going to look like for your young person. Sometimes it can feel with meetings like you're being called into the head teacher's office. We hear that quite a lot from parents, that you feel like, you know, when you get the phone call from school, it's a, oh no, what's happened? So, what can be barriers to effective engagement in meetings for parents? So, what are the things that can be an issue? And this is one of the slides that we actually also share with members of staff. So, sometimes going into those meetings, you can have your own experience of what it was like. So, you may not have had a good experience at school. You may have found that it was difficult at school, and that sometimes can have an impact on you going into a school setting and a meeting, because you've got all of that emotion behind you and you may not even be aware of that. Also, some people have been brought up very much in a culture that professionals know best, and they don't feel that they are in a position to challenge or ask any questions, because if the doctor says or if the teacher says, then they must be absolutely right. There's also the issue, as I've mentioned, around acronyms, if I can say it, and just knowing what people are talking about. And I can remember going to very first annual review meeting for my child and sitting in the room and thinking, wow, because it was like a whole nother language where everybody was just talking in all these different, or felt like codes, and I just didn't feel involved in the conversation. And it can also sometimes feel really intimidating if you're walking into a room of staff that all know each other, professionals that have been working together, and you walk in and they're all talking to each other and they all know each other. You can feel a little bit like the outsider. And all of those feelings really are natural. So, don't feel that that's wrong, because most people do feel like that. So what we need to do is we need to change the power dynamics and give you the confidence to be able to engage effectively during those meetings. So the way that we can do that is really for you to be prepared for those meetings, remembering that at the end of the day, you are the person in that room that knows your child best. You are with them all the time, and you have been with them all the time. Enabling you not to be afraid to ask questions, ensuring that you've got the right information, ensuring that you know your rights, and that you are confident to be able to put over your views when you're in that room. So we're going to have a little bit of a look around the legislation, and what happened, what your rights are in effect. So the first one we're going to look at is the Children and Families Act, which came into force in 2014, sometimes called SEND reforms. You might hear that term used. It really was to bring about a cultural change and to make local authorities and partners, so schools, health services, work together. And we refer a lot to this section, which is section 19, and that talks about how they have a responsibility to ensure that they are getting the views, wishes and feelings of the child or young person and their parent. That parents, children, young people are able to fully participate in any decisions that are made. And that it is important that they provide you with the necessary information. So they should be giving you the information that you need, but they also have a responsibility under that law to support you to be able to participate in those meetings. So, for example, it could be that if you are dyslexic, you might want to have the information printed in a different colour. All those types of things and adjustments they should be making for you if that's what you need. If you need to have it in an audio format, they should be providing it in an audio format for you. The other legislation which I use, and the girls in the office will tell you I do this all the time, I have a real thing about the UNCRC. There are 3 particular articles in here which underpin your rights to participate. So articles 12 and 13 get used a lot, and there's a link at the bottom. You will get all these slides, and that takes you to a summary of all the different articles or laws within this Act. And 12 and 13 really talk about the child's right to be able to express their views, feelings and wishes, and that they should have the freedom to express their thoughts and opinions. So if your child says, I don't like English because it sucks, that's fine, because that's their right to be able to say that. And that's one of the things that we do spend time really, working with people to understand that actually if a young person has said something that might not land great with some people, it's still their view and you need to include it. So things like in your education health care plans, if you had one, then we would expect it to be the young person's voice and not altered to be more politically correct. There's also Article 5, which a lot of people forget, and that is the fact that there is a responsibility to respect the rights and the responsibilities of a parent and carer to provide guidance and direction for their child as they grow up. And obviously that will be slightly different for a 3-4-year-old to say a 17-year-old, because they have different capacity to make their own choices. But obviously that is very much your right to be able to say, actually, this is the type of lifestyle that I want for my child. So before attending a meeting, just to give you some sort of top tips in effect, and they may sound really basic, but they can have a really big impact if you don't. So planning. Do you know where the venue is? Do you know how long it's going to take to get there? Do you know what the parking arrangements are? So, is it that you need to have change for a meter? Is it an app? Do you have that app on your phone? Making sure you've got a notepad and a pen. And do you know who you're going to be asking for or where you need to sign in? Now, any one of those goes slightly wrong and you can turn up to that meeting really, really flustered. If you're not quite sure, you get there and you find actually you don't have change and the parking app's not working, any of those things can really throw you. So it is worth just taking a few minutes to check that. Also, give yourself some time to look at any information that's been sent before. So, for example, if you were attending a review meeting, an annual review, 2 weeks beforehand, you should have all the paperwork sent out for you to be able to look at. And also look at any of your notes that you might have taken from a previous meeting. And then once you've done that, make notes of any questions or concerns you have and note down any points that you want to raise. And that's really important because when you get in the room, it's not unusual. And, you know, I've been doing this for a long time. It still happens to me. I go blank and then come out of the meeting and go, oh, wish I'd asked. So it's really helpful if you can just jot them down briefly, things that you might want to ask. So during the meeting, so this is basically some of the things that we would encourage you to be doing. So active listening. Don't be afraid to ask if you don't understand anything or if they refer to another meeting. So if they say, oh, well, you know, when we did X, Y, and Z, well, this happened, then ask, you know, you weren't at that meeting, you need to know what that conversation was. And also just if you don't understand an acronym, then just say, I don't understand what that is. Watch people's body language, how they're interacting. That's really helpful. Actually, you can pick up on stuff if they're holding back a bit and maybe not wanting to tell you something because they're not sure how it's going to land, or if there's something that then you're not quite sure about. That can really be quite helpful if you have that ability to do that. Obviously, feedback what it's like for you, for your child or young person, and what it's like for the rest of the family. So, for example, you know, the situation maybe they'd like you to bring your child in a few minutes later in the morning because they think that it would help with them getting into classroom when it wasn't so busy. But then you might have issues with that because you've got other children that you've got to get into school. So it's about having those conversations saying, well, that isn't going to work for me because of this and this. Actually, when my child comes into school, they really like this, but they don't like that. And don't be afraid to say if you think it's not going to work, because you know your family best, you know your child best, and you know what's going to work for you. Take notes, and I do suggest not War and Peace. There's a real risk that you just feel like you've got to get everything down in case you miss it, but just try and take key notes, the key things that they're saying, any actions that need to be done, and then ask for, if someone is taking notes, which they should be, ask for a copy of the notes to be emailed to you. And also ask for someone to give you a contact email of somebody within that meeting, so that if you do get out of the room and you think, actually, I should have asked, or maybe this would work, then you've got someone that you can go back to and have those conversations. So after the meeting, and this is the bit that we tend to struggle more with because of our busy lives, but it's really helpful just to take a few minutes, even if it's just on the car journey back home, to think about, actually, was there anything that I wish I had said, or was there anything that I wish that I'd asked and I didn't ask? And then you can follow any of that up with a phone call or an email if you've managed to get the email address. Really important to just follow up any actions you have. So, you know, they could say, actually, we're a little bit concerned that your child's hearing's not right, maybe you need to book a hearing test. And then obviously just check the actions that they've been set have also been agreed, that have also been completed. Other things to think about, if you can, then take some time out for you afterwards. It can be quite hard doing some of the meetings, particularly if they're you know, around diagnosis or changes in circumstance, and find someone to talk to, even if that's just phoning up your mate for 5 minutes and talking about anything that's not even connected to the situation, just so that you can have a bit of space. So we're going to home in a little bit more now on education, and this is a quote from the SEND Code of Practice. So the SEND Code of Practice is the guidance that the government have published to support people to be able to ensure that they are meeting the legal requirements of the Children and Families Act and the SEND regulations. So one of the points in here is that if a child is on SEND support, so this is not not an EHCP level. This is right back earlier than that. So as soon as they're on the SEN register, then the schools have a responsibility to be talking regularly to you. And that should be at least 3 times a year. So that could be that it's at an individual planning meeting, it could be parents' evenings, it could be annual reviews. They can use whichever method they like, but there should be at least 3 occasions, ideally 1 per term, where you have those conversations with your school setting and you're able to do something that we'll talk about in a minute, which is the assess, plan, do, review process. This is a really good reference to have in your back pocket from the code of practice. So 6.2 talks about the fact about the identification of children having additional needs. But what's interesting is that point that I've highlighted in blue. In particular, parents know their children best. And it's important that all professionals listen and understand when parents express concerns about their child's development. So if you're concerned, you know them, you know that something's not what you expect, then absolutely, you have a right to be heard and you have a right to be expressing your concerns about your child's development, and that should be taken seriously. So I mentioned earlier on the assess, plan, do, review cycle and how that works. So this little graphic does explain it, but I'm going to go into very simple terms. So to start with, if somebody thinks actually they're not quite making the progress that I would expect them to make, or they seem to be struggling, they should do an assessment. Now that assessment should also draw on information from the child. So they should be starting to think about actually, is there something going on? So for example, it might be we're noticing that, Sarah's having problems in this particular class and we don't know why. So they might talk to you as parents and you might turn around and say, she's really struggling. She's not getting on with the person that she's sat next to, or that's a really difficult night for her the night before and she doesn't sleep very well. So there's all those sorts of things that need to be taken into consideration. So they should have that assessment stage. Based on that, they should come up with a plan of action. They then do the plan of action, in effect, and afterwards they review it. So the doing part usually takes quite a few weeks just to make sure that it embeds. Psychology says it takes at least 6 weeks to change some form of behaviour or pattern. So you would expect them to be implementing that, and then they would need to review it. Has what we've set out to do actually worked? And then it would either be a case of yes, so they might continue that, or they might stop it if it's done what it needed to do, or they might go, actually, no, we need to do something else. So that cycle is a continual ongoing cycle, and it can be a very informal process, or it can be much more formal depending obviously on the circumstance. So if you think around an assessment process for, say, dyslexia, that would be more formal than an assessment that a teacher might do in a classroom. And then this slide talks about the very formal process of an annual review and how an annual review works for a child that has an education, health and care plan, and what the statutory timeframes are for that. So as I mentioned earlier on, as parents, they should be providing you with information, and that should be all sent to you at least 2 weeks before the review meeting takes. You should not be seeing documents on the day. All those who should be there in advance so that you have time to review them and to make any notes, and so that you're ready to ask any questions within that review. The next slide shows a really good video, which I said you'll get the slides and we'll put that out so you can have a look at that. The video goes through the annual review process. It's about 4 minutes long, and it just talks you through what that process looks like and how it should work. There are also some tools to help you. So there is a list of SEND information and advice providers, which are all on that link there on the Council for Disabled Children's website. They can give you advice on anything that's education related. I think it's about 4 A4 pages full of different organisations, and it's very clear whether they are organisations that are free to access, like our local SENDIAS service, or whether they're ones that you have to make a donation or need to pay for. There's also a organisation called IPSI, and I should know what it stands for, but I can never remember it. And they are brilliant. They have loads of information on the website, template letters, all sorts of things that are really, really useful for parents. And the other one, which I hope you will never need to use, but it's there just in case you do, which is the Corum's Children Legal Centre. And they are fantastic. They are really good at giving you advice about the rights of your child. And they are really helpful in making sure that the child's voice is central and being heard in any sort of legal proceedings that are taking place. So if you think about health and social care meetings, some of the things that we suggest is, if you can, try to make sure that the person that you're seeing, the practitioner, has sight of any plans or profiles or school passports that you have, so that they can understand your child's need in a much wider context. Prepare any questions that you want to ask, and try and do that beforehand if you can. You can send them to the practitioner in advance, because that can be quite helpful. Any evidence that you might want to share in advance, and that sounds really silly, but I know when I was having my eldest was having an assessment for autism, one of the things that they really struggled to see was any form of repetitive behaviour, because he just didn't show that, and we were able to video that and take that with us to the appointment, so that was quite helpful. There may be subjects that you need to talk to the practitioner about, that you might not feel comfortable talking to them in the presence of your child in the initial conversation. So if that is, then just make sure that you either provide it in advance, or that you ask for an additional appointment, or go in first. Things, for example, if your child was self-harming, you might not want to talk about that with the health person while the child's there. You might want to have that conversation initially before they come in. And think through what you would like as an outcome of the appointment. So if you're going into an appointment, actually what's the outcome that you would like at the end of the appointment? So again, there are requirements for social care and health services around providing accessible information. So we talked earlier about the fact that you have the right to be able to have information in a format that suits you. And again, this is something that's been reinforced with the accessible information standard. And as you can see, we're talking 2016, so it's been around a long time, 2014 in one, 2016 in the other. So these are not new things that should be a surprise to services. There are 5 things that have been set out for members of staff in the NHS and adult social care services to be able to do. And these are the 5 things. So just so that you're aware, ask if the person has any information or communication needs, record those needs, highlight or flag it on the person's file, share the information about that person's needs with other colleagues. Obviously, consent needs to be done for that, and provide carers with information in an accessible format. So those are their responsibilities. It's not your responsibility. They should be doing that for you. So if you have any additional needs yourself, they should be making those adjustments. That's something that they are required to do. So if you need to have the information in a different format, do not feel that you can't ask for that. It's your right to do so. And again, there's a lot of tools that can help you. So contact, have a helpline, and then there's a couple of others. I'm going to show you these. I'm going to try and show you these online. Just bear with me. Hopefully this will work. Being very optimistic now. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen. We don't need to talk to Charlie at contact. Right, okay, so I'll just accept that, then you can see it. So this is Contact, which is an organisation that supports families with disabled children. There is a phone line that you can phone if you don't want to look up information, which is here, and they will talk you through, and they're brilliant. They are so knowledgeable about so many different subjects across education, health and social care. But they also have, if you go into the Help for Families, they have a whole range of different things that can support you. So they have a whole list of all the different medical conditions and information about those. They have information about rights. So, for example, how to request a carer's assessment, fact sheets to help you fill in any of those horrible forms that we have to do. And they also run events and have what they call a listening ear service, which is a friendship service. So you can phone up and talk to somebody about things that are happening, and they will listen to that and try and help you work through some of those things and come up with some solutions. So that's Contact. Cerebra, and again, you will get all of these links, have a really good toolkit which gives you support and advice about how to access public services. You can download get a free copy, and that will be sent out to you. And it very much is based on problem solving. So it's all about how to find the right thing to help you and your young person. That's a really good tool. And I'm going to try and click on this one because it's right behind the button, which is not helpful. And then this is the Council for Disabled Children. So the link that was on earlier that took you to lots of information services, this is their website. They run an expert parent program, and as part of that, there's a whole toolkit on how to prepare for meetings. And the one that I wanted to show you, so you can see there's one about tips for health appointments, tips for about using the NHS, but this one is particularly helpful. So we suggest to parents, if you've got a health appointment like your first paediatrician's appointment, or even if you're going to the GP, this is quite useful for focusing your conversations, because the reality is 5 to 10 minutes in a GP room is not very long. So it helps you to think about things that are going well, things that could make it a bit easier, and then things that you've got concerns about. And then there is a whole checklist of different things that you might have that you want to talk about, and it encourages you just to rate those. This is really good because it makes sure that you're really focused when you have those appointments. As I said, if you've only got 10 minutes, the last thing you want to do is spend 7 minutes talking about the things that are going brilliantly and then only have a couple of minutes and forget some of the things that you need to have help with. So all of this will be sent out to you, but you can get those. And if you need hard copies, please just email us and we will send you out hard copies in the post. That is not a problem at all. Okay. Technology, I love this sharing and resharing. Just bear with. Okay. So my last sort of message really to you is try to remember this saying, you can't up and you need to take care of yourself first. That's something that we forget so much as parent carers. And Rachel, who sat in the opposite side of the office, is probably laughing now because I am one of the worst for this. So just this slide is quite helpful just to really remind us what, some of those signs, if you are getting stressed and it is becoming a bit much, some of the things to look out for, and to look out for these in your friends and other parent carers, so these are some of the things that you might be experiencing, and in those situations, try if you can to take some time and to get a bit of a break. There are services out there as well that can support you, so things like talking therapies, and if you feel that you benefit from any of that, then please give us a shout and we can point you in the right direction. So then I'm going to ask Rachel to stop the recording, and then if there's any questions we can go through those.